Hello, and welcome to episode 22 of Handled Ish Productivity for the Imperfect. This week, we're going to talk about when you put the ish in handled ish, meaning when you're just not on your A game, that you are perhaps not meeting your own expectations and those sorts of things, whether it's just a one-time situation or kind of a moment that you're having in your life. So if that sounds like something you have experienced, which I'm pretty sure is everyone, be sure to continue to listen. And if that is not what you're experiencing right now, maybe also continue to listen because maybe you can help someone in your life who's going through it, as they say. So again, this is Handled Ish Productivity for the Imperfect, a weekly podcast for those who want to elevate their productivity but are not looking for perfection. I'm your host, Betsy Hayes, and I'm so happy, as always, that you're here with us in podcast land or on YouTube. I am obviously not in my regular recording space. I am in a hotel room in Phoenix because I happen to be here at a conference during the time that I am recording this episode. So, hence the very different background. I have my hotel room coffee here. I am propping up my computer with a little box that held some of the jewelry that I brought. It is definitely putting the ish in handled ish for this particular recording of the episode. And before we get into, the topic, I think it's important to take a little bit of a deeper dive into the name of the podcast. So, obviously, I chose to call it Handled Ish instead of Handled for humor. If you listen to the first episode, you know that that is a core value of mine. I believe that we should try to find humor every way we can. And I also believe that humor is one of the best ways to succeed in this crazy life that we're all experiencing. So the idea of handled ish was funny to me, so that was one of the reasons I chose the name. The other reason is, as you know, I'm a university professor, and with my students, I always talk a lot about getting things handled. It's a very applied profession. I teach public relations, and so we do a lot of hands-on work. And obviously, it is wonderful as a public relations professional to have things that are handled. And I evidently said this so much that in 2015, the graduating class, shout out to them, they're so amazing still, of course, they bought me a brick in our educator wall at the university. Over by the education building, there is an educator wall where people buy bricks and they have their name on them. And so it's just a very lovely honor to have a brick in the educator wall. And my brick says handled. And of course, it made me smile and laugh, and we all, loved every minute of the humor behind it. And it was really, really touching. And, years later, when I was thinking about what to call this podcast, and I wanted it to be about productivity, because as you know, I'm a productivity nerd and I'm trying to figure out how we can do the things that we want to do and, still maintain the life that we want. And as I was reflecting on the word handled, I realized that that's not exactly my total brand as a human. My total brand as a human is really handled-ish. Like, I'm pretty on the ball. I get a lot of stuff done. I have been very blessed with an amazing, successful career. And I believe I've done some really good things in the area of productivity personally. However, because I am a human and because I'm also not a very precise human, I'm not an engineer. I really am more of a handled-ish person. Like a lot of the things I do, spot on. Some of the stuff, not so much. And because thinking about that kind of again made me laugh and also made me think that most of us are like that, right? At our best, we are probably handled-ish. We are imperfect human beings. And that's why the tagline productivity for the imperfect. So along those lines, I got to thinking that of late, I am really putting the ish in handled ish, meaning I have not been on my A game. And I really thought hard about how to approach that subject on this podcast. And I ended up believing that it's super important because I'm pretty sure that everyone listening or watching has had either a day or a moment where they put the ish in handled ish, or maybe going through a time period, which happens to be where I'm at right now. So you can put the ish in handled ish, in a specific singular thing. We've all done this, something like putting the wrong date in an email and then having to change, send a correction, hitting reply all, and we probably shouldn't have hit reply all based on the what we shared or information, those sorts of things. But sometimes we're kind of going through a moment where most things are handled-ish, and there's really not a lot handled, and that's really kind of where I'm at right now. I particularly at work, I'm pretty much on the ball. I take my work very seriously. It's a very important value to me to be good at what I do. But lately I'm finding I'm, late for stuff, which is not me. I definitely, for those of you who encounter me in real life, I am often a just in time person when it comes to punctuality, but late is not me, and that's not the way I want to show up in the world. And that has happened, more than once over the last few weeks, and it's kind of bothering me. And I started thinking about that a little bit more, and I also realized that my the way I want to be with taking care of myself, I've also been very ish about that lately, whether it's, not eating healthfully, not exercising, not meditating as much as I, want to for what I believe is healthy for me. Sorry, Josie, my meditation teacher. It's my confession. Um, and so I started thinking about, okay, well, this is not what I want. So I guess the first thing when you're in an ish situation, is to, recognize that this is not the way you want to be. So that's where I'm at, right? I am, this is not the way I want to be in the world. This is not, the way I want to be handled. I don't want to be ish in these particular areas, or any area, right? We're always looking for handle. So recognizing that I'm not where I want to be, and then trying to figure out what to do about it. And spoiler alert, I do not have an amazing amount of answers on this podcast. I'm going to share some thoughts that I have with you. I'm going to try some things over the next week, and next episode, I'm going to report back. And I'm hopeful that in between when this episode airs, it'll air for the first time on June 4th. And the following podcast, which will air on June 11th, maybe I will hear from some of you with some of the things that you do when you are putting the ish in handled ish. So thinking about this, I realized that I really feel like most problems can be solved with sort of structural changes and also mindset changes. I'm a very, very big believer in processes and structure and protocols in order to have freedom in life, in order to be creative, in order to have fun, in order to do the things. I feel like we do need to have, some structure around it to be at our best. And that is my personal opinion. I know a lot of people don't subscribe to that. Again, my rule, you do you, and whatever works for you. God bless you. And I'm pumped about it, right? So structurally, I want to make some changes. I also think that anytime we're sort of in this sort of place, we want to do some mindset shifts also. So structural shifts, mindset shifts, when they are working together, I think can have some really good positive change. So that is what I'm going to be working with. So structurally, I realized that I have not done a good job with the transition time test that I encouraged all of us to take a few weeks ago. And if you remember, or even if you don't, that's the idea that during times of transition, that we pause, we contemplate what we're doing next, we figure out what our goals are about the next thing, what kind of attitude do we want to have, what kind of things do we need from that particular thing, whether that's information or experiences or whatever. Do we have everything we need for whatever the next thing is, whether that's materials or an attitude adjustment or whatever. And really being thoughtful during that transition time in order to make whatever we're doing next the best it can be. And I still love this idea, even though I've failed miserably in implementing it for the most part. I have on occasion over the last few weeks, and I've definitely noticed that it does serve me. And so that's one of the structural things I want to be doing over the next week, is really working on that transition time. And I'm a visual cue human. So what I'm going to do after I finish recording this podcast is I'm going to change the wallpaper on my phone. So every time I pick up my phone, there's going to be some visual cues about transition time. I think I might say something like, it's transition time, goals, mindset. I don't know, maybe there's those two things, right? So every time I pick up my phone, it will remind me that I am most likely in a transition time, and these are the things that I want to do. I want to think about what my goals are for the next thing, and I want to make sure that I am ready, whatever that means. And I think that visual cue is going to be really helpful to me. Structurally, I was trying to think of another way that I could remind myself of this very important thing I want to do. And I got to thinking, well, we all use the restroom several times a day. So my thought is that if I can, use that as an anchor, whenever I use the restroom, as I'm, washing my hands, to think about whatever the next thing is, and have those sort of check-ins. So it's not really a visual cue. It's sort of an anchor, a daily habit anchor, I guess you might call it. So we'll see how that goes. So those are a couple of things I'm going to do structurally. The other thing I'm going to do structurally is, I think I have too much that I'm trying to accomplish at the moment. And sometimes for me, when I have too many things I want to accomplish, I spend a lot of time organizing my to-do list and not doing things on it. So that is my cue that I really need to maybe, put something in a different season, maybe reevaluate how in depth I want to be with a particular thing. I'm really going to take a deep dive into my to-do list as well. And one of the great things about being at a conference is I had to fly here. And so I'm going to be able to take advantage of that airport and flying time on the way home to really take a deep dive at my to-do list. I actually love traveling, especially for work, because those airport and flight times are really good times to sort of regroup and reset. I really am very intentional about taking advantage of that. So the timing couldn't be more perfect. So the other thing I'm going to do is work on mindset. So I'm contemplating a few things. And one of them is this idea of keeping promises to myself. So this is an idea that I heard, I think it was from Mel Robbins. She talked about it on her podcast, but I heard it from her on Instagram. I actually don't listen to her podcast. Sorry, Mel. I'm sure it's amazing. But I do follow her and consume her content on Instagram. Highly recommend, by the way. And she went through this whole thing about, if we're struggling with, meeting some goals or doing things we want to do, to maybe really focus on the idea of keeping the promises we make to ourselves. Often as humans, and also often as women, we do really well keeping our promises to others, but we don't always keep promises to ourselves. And I am definitely in that space right now at this time in my life. I have beautiful, structured, organized days that include doing the things I want to do, particularly in the areas of eating healthy and exercise and being on time to stuff. And for whatever reason, I'm not keeping those promises to myself. So I'm really going to work on that. I love that idea. That just feels very nurturing and healthy to keep the promises I made to myself. Which brings me to the next mindset idea, and it's for meditation, and it's this idea of loving kindness. And I have really found that as a person, I'm really good, I believe. I hope the people in my life will agree that I'm really good at um, giving loving kindness to others. I'm not as good as giving it to myself. So I thought that this idea of keeping promises to myself, coupled with this idea of loving kindness, inside, might be just a really nice way to remember that, taking get better care of myself is, a really loving, nurturing thing. And it will also, as we all know, right, allow me to be more productive and do the things I want to do, and hopefully live a longer, healthier life. So there's lots of really good reasons. So I'm hopeful that that will be helpful. And then the third mindset is this idea of being an example of what's possible. And this is an idea that comes from Brooke Castillo. She has a podcast called The Life Coach School, which, if I haven't recommended it, I couldn't recommend it more. She does so much what she calls thought work, and I just really agree with the way that she advises us to, do our things. And she talks about how she really has been able to accomplish a lot in her life because she feels that she wants to be an example of what is possible. And that idea just really great in my opinion. And if I can be an example of what is possible for, good things that, others might want to do, I think that will have a lot of value for me. I will feel good about that. And then also hopefully that will help others as well. I'm thinking maybe this might be the best mindset shift idea for me. I happen to be an obliger. And if you don't know what that is, check out Gretchen Rubin's For Tendencies. She has a free quiz online. She basically talks about how there's 4 personality types when you deal with expectations. And so a lot of us deal with internal expectations and external expectations differently. And so there's a quiz to figure out, what quadrant you are in and what you can do about that. And I am an obliger, which means I will typically really crush external expectations and don't always succeed with internal expectations. And I remember when I first discovered this a few years ago, and when she published her framework, I was really not happy. Full story. And I hate being an obliger. I wish I wasn't an obliger. I don't want to be an obliger. I wish, no, just not what I want for myself. I have learned over the years that I need to, anytime you're resisting something that much, by the way, that's a clue that you might need to sit down and reflect a little bit. And that's what I have had to do. And dang it, I am an obliger. And so as a result, sometimes these ideas doing what I want to do for me as an opportunity to be an example of what's possible for others, is probably going to be a better mindset shift than if the benefit is just for me because of this whole obliger thing that it's just not a thing. If you are an obliger, you might understand where I'm coming from. I hope, to be honest with you, that if you're an obliger, you don't hate it like I do. And if you have figured out how to make peace with it, please share, because I am all ears. So that's the scoop. So if you are like me, putting the ish in handled ish sort of globally, full confession, I feel like that's kind of where I'm at, or even just a little bit, what are the things that you do to get yourself back a little bit more toward handled than handled ish? What are the structural things that you do? What are the mindset shifts? Is anything that I've talked about, perhaps potentially helpful to you? All of that. So would love to hear what you think, and I will, give these a try and report back. And in an immediate time frame. I promise that in episode 23, I will report back on this stuff, because I find that if that is an unclear deadline for reporting back on the podcast, that sometimes I delay a little bit more than I intend. So that is the scoop there. So thank you for joining me today. I'd love to hear what you think. Let me know on my website, BetsyAHayes.com. Hayes, of course, is Hays. Also social at Betsy Hayes on everything. To keep this podcast going, if you're enjoying it or getting value, which I so sincerely hope you are, please subscribe, please share with a friend, consider rating and reviewing. I very, very much appreciate and value your support. Doing this is so fun for me, and I'm so hopeful that it's helping others as well. So tune in next week for the next episode of Handled-ish, Productivity for the Imperfect. You may have noticed that the last couple of weeks with my interviews with Alyssa, I didn't get to do the sign off because of some technical stuff. So it was truly Handled-ish, completely on brand, right, for the podcast. But I do want to share, my favorite line, which a couple of you have shared, that you say it with me, which could not make me happier. Until then, take care, be kind to yourself. You are doing way better than you think you are. Trust me.